This effectively paused all evictions except those where the landlord was making a claim, a charge of a threat to public health and safety. It started as a safety measure with the courts. This is passed by the Judicial Council. They're in charge of the judicial branch. They have nothing, they're not the executive branch, they're not the legislative branch. And it was meant to be a stopgap measure. And I think that when the Judicial Council passed it, they were hoping that the governor or the legislature would step in and do something more. They didn't. The executive orders passed by the governor were ineffectual, and the legislature did not step in. The Judicial Council threatened to rescind the rule in, I think it was June. There was a big outcry. Hey, why don't we give more time for the legislature? And so it was extended. It expires on September 1st. So yesterday, the Judicial Council voted to sunset this rule. Here's the problem. I've been spending the last 4 or 5 months telling clients about this rule. And under the rule, the clerk could not issue a summons until 90 days after the governor rescinds the executive order declaring a state of emergency. So I'm telling my clients, you have at least 90 days from when the governor ends the state of emergency. I don't think that's going to happen today. I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow. So we're at least 3 months away from you having to go to court. What the Judicial Council did yesterday makes all of that advice completely wrong and ineffectual. So a big part of my job is now going back and contacting all those clients and saying, guess what, I'm wrong, things changed. Luckily, we were aware that was a possibility, so we kept a list of them. They're not just floating in the wind thinking something's wrong. We'll be able to get back in touch with them. But what this rule, my point is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and people think that there are still protections when there won't be. Yes, right now there are. Right now, if a landlord tries to file a case, the rule applies. And it applies until midnight on September 1st. But on September 2nd, the wave will crash. All of these rules will go away, and the eviction machine will start churning again. So let's look at the other protections. That was the biggest one. Remember, it was procedural. It just stopped the machine. It doesn't give you any substantive rights. Once you finally get to court, once it finally opens, you would still lose under that old rule if you didn't have some other way to protect yourself. These are those ways, and there's a lot of them. So one, the Federal CARES Act. It applies to landlords with federally backed mortgages, including housing authorities. Says they cannot file an action for non-payment of rent or other fees, or charge fees related to non-payment, or give a no-cause termination notice during the time the act was in effect. I don't remember the starting date. I think it was sometime in March, but that expired on July 25th, 2020. So that's no longer there. The president's executive order did not extend this. The president's recent executive order merely gave guidance to HUD to think about whether or not people need to be evicted. So the CARES Act is a bit hard. The challenge for us is finding out what's federally backed. When a tenant comes in, we don't know if their landlord has a federally backed mortgage. That's not easily found information. So this is going to create a big challenge for us in figuring out whether or not the tenant actually has this protection. We estimate that, that this covers most tenants. Most landlords have a federally backed mortgage, but figuring out who and which in a given case will be difficult. The executive order. So, I'm kind of starting with the substantive protection, starting big federally, and now moving to state, and then we'll get down to local. So statewide, there was Executive Order 2820 that allowed local jurisdictions to pass their own protections. It basically suspended state law that limited local jurisdictions from stepping on the state in this area of law. And the governor's order said, no, local jurisdictions, go ahead and step on the state's toes. We want you to be able to protect your tenants if you think that's necessary. It was extended by another executive order and finally another one. If local jurisdictions so chose, they could extend their protections through September 30th of 2020. The other executive order that got a lot of attention and made a lot of us very mad, a lot of tenant lawyers very mad, it was Executive Order N3720. It provided limited relief in non-payment of rent cases for tenants who contacted their landlord and proved their COVID-related income loss. It expired on May 31st, 2020, and it was very narrow. Very few tenants at the beginning of March or April, when they found out they couldn't pay their rent, went ahead and contacted their landlord in writing and proved their COVID-related income loss, or within 5 days, I think the executive order gave. So it got a lot of attention and news, but very few people who are coming through my door actually availed themselves of this protection. So I think it's pretty empty. So we get down to the local moratoria. So Arcata, Eureka, and Humboldt all passed their own moratorium. They're all a little bit different. Arcata's urgency ordinance 1532 is only for non-payment, does not apply to no-fault termination notices. The tenant has to prove that the non-payment was caused by COVID. My favorite part is that they have to prove that the loss of income was not offset by a government benefit. Proving a negative is very, very difficult to do. And so we'll see how that goes in court, but how do you prove that your loss of employment was not offset when you started getting some other benefit? That I think will, make it not applicable to very many people. It'll be that subset of people who never got their unemployment benefits. But if you lost your income and you got unemployment, well, it looks like this ordinance doesn't apply. And that expired July 31st of 2020. Eureka Ordinance 898, which was extended by, I think, Eureka Ordinance 901, prohibits non-payment, so prohibits eviction for non-payment is what that should say. If the tenant notifies the landlord within 14 days of the rent coming due, proves it was caused by COVID, and can repay it within 180 days. It also prohibits eviction for no cause, so that's a big one. There's some question about whether landlords who have tenants who can't pay got wind of all these protections for COVID-related income loss and thought, you know what, I'm just going to give a 60-day notice or a 30-day notice and not worry about all this COVID-related income loss. The Eureka ordinance prohibits that. It also requires the landlord to notify the tenant the existence of protections. I think this is actually one of the strongest parts. If I have a tenant who couldn't pay the rent and comes in but didn't get a notice from their landlord that the Eureka protections were there, then I think the landlord didn't comply with the ordinance, and I think my tenant wins. And so that, I think, is going to end up being a very strong part of their moratorium. It also expired on July 28th, 2020. Last one is the Humboldt County Ordinance 2642, kind of a hybrid. Prohibits eviction, a hybrid if you looked at Arcata and Eureka, prohibits eviction for non-payment if the tenant notifies the landlord within 14 days of the rent coming due, can prove it was caused by COVID, and can repay within 90 days. And also has a no-cause prohibition as well, which is, we think, good. And that one, however, expired May 31st, 2020, and was not extended. Finally, kind of getting a little bit outside, but I only have 2 slides outside of the pure moratoria. I think the COVID crisis really eclipsed the rollout of AB 1482. AB 1482 is a law that took effect January 1st, 2020, that basically brought rent control and just cause eviction protections that were only found in the Bay Area or LA to all of California. So I used to tell clients, hey, this is the free market up here. The Supreme Court, in a case called Becerra, said that a landlord can evict a tenant for any reason or no reason, just not a bad reason. What are the bad reasons? Well, retaliation, discrimination. So unless it's retaliation or discrimination, the landlord can probably evict you. That was the law before January 1st, 2020. As of January 1st, 2020, covered tenants, and so it's not every house, every home, every apartment building, but it's a lot of them. For those covered tenants, there are caps on the rent increase. So it's 5% plus the local CPI or 10%, whichever is lower. And it limits the reasons why tenants can be evicted. This applies to most multifamily housing. It applies to single family homes that are owned by like an investment group or a corporation. It applies to duplexes where there's 2 dwelling units on the same property, but title for each cannot be alienated, cannot be separated. So again, it's not everyone, or it doesn't apply to someone who's in their first year of their tenancy, or if someone has moved in within that year. So it's not perfect, it's not across the board, but it is big. It does change the ball game, and a lot of landlords were not aware of it because they never really had time to become aware of it because COVID hit. And so these protections we are also looking at because a lot of the overlap applies here. A lot of the multifamily buildings also had this AB 1482 protection that might come into play. And finally, Penal Code Section 396 prohibits price gouging. So that's, in times of a disaster, this is a time of a disaster, there's a statewide disaster order. So a rent increase of over 10% is prohibited. And there is a vacancy protection with this one. So that means that if one tenant moves out and the landlord rents to the next tenant at over 10%, that landlord has violated this criminal law. So the next slide is all my, how to get in touch with us. That's a lot of information. It's taken me, and it's my job to learn this, a lot of time to learn it. So I expect you to have questions, but I also want to respect your time, and that's why I tried to condense it. Not seeing any. I will go to that last slide, the who we are. I think I said most of this. Our intake hours, 9 to 12, 1 to 4, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We are busy. We are under-resourced, as you may know. And so we're not going to be able to help everyone. We're going to start a triage system where we look at certain types of evictions for actual representation. There will probably be a lot of self-represented tenants who are not going to be able to get much advice from us other than maybe a packet, just because at this time there's 2 lawyers in our office and we're expecting a wave of people. So practical advice: call early, call often. If you have your documents ready to send us, that's good too, because we're going to have to see them. We are not open to the public. I should have mentioned that. So there's a huge barrier now to accessing our office, especially when you have something timely like an eviction case that you need help with. And we just have to deal with it. I don't get to make that decision. We're not going to be open to the public. We have a Dropbox, and we can do a lot of things online. If we have to, we can meet people at the office and hand them documents, but the traditional let's sit in the office together over a desk and fill out this answer to an eviction is not going to be happening.
Hey, Greg, I have a question.
Okay, Diamond. Oh, hey, Diamond.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thanks.
That was a lot of details. Thank you so much. I want to get like an overall sort of umbrella statement, because knowing that those details exist just means that I have to like Google them later if I'm explaining this to people. But the overall thing is that if a person is concerned, they need to communicate with their landlord in writing, and they need to have as much documented as possible written down to start anything. Like,
yes, that is true, but it's probably too late, right? I mean, if they're being evicted for not paying the April rent, documenting it now probably doesn't get them very far in for most of those protections. So at this stage in the game, I think the bottom line is the eviction machine will start again. The pause button is going to be pushed unless the legislature or the governor steps in. And everyone might have some substantive protection, but it's going to be very factually dependent on why they are being evicted, when their notice was received, and where in the county they live. And I don't expect anyone other than a law firm to be able to actually figure this out. We're trying to create tools so that we can quickly figure these things out, but it's a lot. I mean, landlord-tenant law was a lot before all of these protections, and now when we add these in, it's a whole lot. So don't feel like you need to understand. Again, bottom line, pause button's coming off, and you might have protections, but it's going to depend.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Diamond.
We did get one question in the chat. Greg, hi, this is Robert Ward, DHHS. Would you be okay with sharing the slides and or the recording?
Yes, I don't think I've said anything that would get me in trouble this time. So yes, I'd be happy to share the slides and the recording. I'll PDF them and email them to you, Rob, to distribute.
Great, thanks.
Hi, Greg. This is Sally. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now I'm more confused, but it sounds like it's really going to depend on where you live in Humboldt County, and that's going to have an impact on your choices. Is that right?
On your defenses, and I maybe should have started by saying I'm looking at this as a lawyer. I am looking at this as a litigator. I am looking at this as how are we going to fight for you to stay in your home.
Mm-hmm.
There are other solutions that are probably a lot easier. If the tenant, had a non-payment issue in April, but now they have their stimulus or their UIB or something and can pay, work it out with the landlord, right? I mean, I think this is a time where both tenants and landlords really do want to engage and stay out of the courts because it's very confusing for both parties. And so opening up those lines of communication, trying to work with one another, realizing like we're in a crisis, let's try to be human to one another. I mean, I think that's kind of the practical push that I should have started with before I went into the kind of legal technicalities if people can't get along. Unfortunately, that's where I get involved most of the times, when people can't get along.
So if I were advising someone today who just received an eviction notice from their landlord and they live in the county, not in any of the cities, what would I say to them?
Well, you'd say try to work it out with your landlord and see if they'll rescind it. If not, you don't really have any protections unless AB 1482 applies to you, or because you said got a notice today, right? Well, everything I went over expired, right? The only thing that was that's still alive is the ability of local jurisdictions to pass their own moratoria or extend it. None of ours have. So the CARES Act, that was July 25th, right? Everything else was end of July. So a notice today is just like a notice on January 2nd, 2020. Except for, hey, we're in a pandemic. Hey, there's all this speculation about rents going down and vacancies. And well, maybe people should work together because of that uncertainty. Well, thank you again for having me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Although the news certainly isn't rosy, it's helpful to know that at least there is legal services to go to if we find ourselves in a jam with a particular client. This is one of the scarier things that I think about this, is that we have people that have been hanging on and not paying rent. And so now comes the big surprise. Oh yeah, there was a moratorium, but that didn't mean that you don't owe the rent. I think a lot of people sort of jumped on it. Oh, rent free, don't have to worry about that. And, didn't have enough money or failed to save enough to cover them now that they have to pay it back. And it's not just keep current, but also pay back for the months that you haven't paid. So I think a lot of us are going to be busier than we are right now, and that's unfortunate.
Yes,
So
and one final point I
Yeah.
wanted to make is just, I think I'd be remiss not to mention that this is going to disproportionately impact people of color. That, I read some Berkeley estimate, and it's like 3/4 of the households who were rental households who experienced a loss of income due to COVID were people of color, households of color. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're really thinking about in terms of how we're going to prioritize our service.
Yep. Does anybody else have any questions for Greg?
Looks like there's a, hi, this is Roger from HCOE. Looks like there's a question in the box there. I don't know if you can answer that. It's directed to you, Greg.
Would you mind reading it? I'm still stuck on my screen share. Actually, I can probably stop that though, right?
Yeah.
And then I can go find the chats. Yes. Oh, 28 chats. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Well, just if you scroll down to the bottom, that's the question that I see that somebody has from.
Yes, I do have an answer to that. So as of now, evictions are heard on Wednesdays and Fridays at 1:30. Wednesdays and Fridays at 1:30. They used to be in Department 8, which was the UD commissioner. And in my experience, and this is not a rule I've seen, this is just anecdotal, what I've seen happening is that they are now being heard in Department 4 and everything is virtual. So, tenants or litigants will have to call in or Zoom in order to participate in any sort of court hearing. But I think the schedule for now is staying the same. Of course, the courts, seeing a huge wave of evictions, might change their schedule because those eviction cases get statutory priority, right? Landlords get to cut the line because of the property interest at stake. That means the court might have to expand its eviction calendar. So citizenship, I saw that question, then I'll go back to you if you don't mind, Roger, now that I'm looking at the chats. So I would send people to us anyway. We might not be able to help. We might. We can always give referrals or try to find referrals. We cannot help undocumented people, but there are, again, exceptions. U-Visa is just one of them. Sometimes if there is an eligible citizen in the home, we might be able to help. So, we do have rules. We do have to follow them. We want to stay here. And if we don't follow our rules, we won't exist. But we also try to make people eligible within our rules as much as possible. And that's why, just like our income guidelines, I don't say, here's our income guideline for you community members to decide whether or not to send someone to us. It is just as complicated as the eviction rules in terms of our funding sources and who we can help and what the exceptions are with age and income and resources. And so we want them to be eligible, so please send everyone to us, even if they might not be documented. We might still be able to help them or at least provide a referral to someone who will. And I don't have that referral off the top of my head because that'd probably be the next question.
What I was going to ask sort of the larger group was, I know there's folks in the group that have relationships or trying to develop relationships with landlords. I'm curious as to what kind of feedback, because again, I think that could be a point of commonality, is that landlords often, maybe they only have one or two places and they're counting on that income, right? So what has been the feedback from landlords? Are they looking to take advantage of this opportunity to do evictions, or are you getting feedback like, yeah, we're open to try to work with our tenants so that it's less hassle for me and all that kind of stuff?
So, hi, Roger. This is Maeve Gannon at Mobile Outreach. How are you? We've had a couple of landlords, because primarily the people we work with are on benefits, cash benefits from the government. So we haven't run into any issues with that. I've been giving technical assistance to most of the landlords and property managers for their tenants that have been impacted by COVID. And they've been pretty successful in navigating those programs to help get those rents paid. For the most part, what I've seen is the landlords and the property managers really want to work with the tenants. The last thing they really want to do is go through an eviction process because it can get really super expensive. So I know of a couple instances where they have tenants that we aren't working with directly, but they're working out on payment plans as well.
And I definitely think that's the right way to go right now. There's a lot of uncertainty on both sides. It is expensive, and so working it out, now is really the time. I see a couple more questions I think I can respond to. What, if any, are protections from landlords who are harassing tenants for non-payment? So we have a lot of this. Landlords have their backs against the wall, right? I'm talking about the small subset of those landlords who are not trying to work it out. They are used to being able to evict their tenants when it gets into this situation. And now when they've gone to court and filed something and nothing happens, they're like, well, what can I do? So they're resorting to all the illegal things. Eviction by force, cutting off utilities, removing windows and doors, showing up with a shotgun, calling the sheriff or law enforcement and saying they're a trespasser. I've seen all of this in this county in the last couple of months. So tenants are scared, and landlords are, acting a fool. And there's really not a lot that anyone can do. If someone is actually locked out of their home because of this behavior, there's a civil code section that applies to them, 789.3, that allows for damages. There's a forcible detainer statute that allows them to sue to get back in. But really, to stop the actual harassment, the daily calls, the pounding on the door, the shining the lights, you're left with like a temporary restraining order or something. So it is a bad situation, and I'm getting more and more of those calls when the main freeway is not available. Everyone's trying to take these side roads to get to the same place. And, you know, as we know, when 101 South is closed, when you try taking whatever that ridge road is, there's a lot of problems with it. And you might end up encountering some illegal things, and that's what we're seeing. Robert, what are the courts going to do if the tenant can't Zoom? So that is a good question. The court is looking at its local rules and wants comments on their local rules by noon on Monday. So I don't know if anyone's going to jump on that. That's my job for the weekend. What we're looking at is parity. So if a tenant comes in and can only be on the phone via Zoom, then we want the other side to be knocked down to that level. What we don't want is the tenant to come in on a telephone and be a black screen of numbers, and the landlord to come in on the screen with a suit, and the attorney in the screen next to him with a suit, and use all the cues and verbal cues and I know the judge anyway kind of things, and our tenant is just listening and doesn't know what's going on, right? So what we're going to really argue for is technological parity. Other things we're going to suggest are, you know, mobile computers, or setting up something in the law library or somewhere else where tenants can go there. The other concern is being able to get away from family or work for this kind of proceeding. You know, there's a big privacy concern, especially if there are allegations about what's going on inside the home, for the tenant to then open up a computer and see everything that's going on inside the home, right? No, I don't have that unauthorized dog. What's on my lap, right? So we really want to create kind of a safe space for tenants to be able to pay attention and have, you know, all their focus on the proceeding at hand. And so those are some of the goals that we're trying to work with the court on and we'll propose to the court. Oh, wow, more questions. Okay, are there any protections for subletters? Yes, so subletters have all the same tenant rights as regular tenants. I did have someone try to call the police on a subletter, not okay. People renting out rooms, same thing. There's a narrow protection for a single lodger in a home where the owner lives. So the reason for this law was the little old lady renting to the college student, and things go sour and little old lady wants him out. She's allowed to give him a notice and then call the police, skip the court. As soon as she rents to 2 college students, no longer a single lodger situation, and so all those tenant laws apply. And so that very narrow exception, single lodger living in the same home with the landlord, that's not a duplex, it's the same walls, the same kitchen, the same everything. That is the only situation where the police can terminate someone. Otherwise, the golden rule, and the thing I've been repeating over and over, to where even my wife is like repeating it to me back because she hears me say it so much, only a judge has the power to kick you out of your home. I will have tenants write that down. We chant it as a mantra. Only a judge has the power to kick you out of your home. Anything else is illegal, and you can call law enforcement. Is there anything that can be done if a family is already vacated? Yes, I mean, there's, if someone was locked out illegally by some of those nasty things that landlords sometimes do, what we call self-help, then they can get back in under something called forcible detainer, and they can also sue for damages under the lockout statute 789.3, or if they were wrongfully evicted, there's a wrongful eviction tort, just kind of like a car accident tort, where you can get all the damages for you being wrongfully evicted because you left when you really didn't have to. If law enforcement is who is there to kick someone out. So fortunately, we have great law enforcement in this area. I do not see this very much in this area. The only place I see it is confusion over some clean and sober homes that, is that a tenant? Is that like a motel? I mean, I will argue it's a tenant and we're working on that issue. But by and large, when a landlord calls the police to say, I want this person out, or the sheriff, they are responding and saying, no, this is a civil matter. And so I have not seen law enforcement in other parts of our service area. So Shasta County, oh, now maybe the recording I don't want, shared. But in other parts of our service area, the sheriff will say, oh, it's hands off. I don't know, it's a civil matter, so I'm not going to step in here. Well, when the landlord is there, you know, with a tractor and a moving truck saying leave, and the sheriff shows up and says, I'm not stepping in, I think that is stepping in. I think that's actively allowing the law to be broken. Not happening here. So here I'm very confident in telling my tenants and my clients, call law enforcement if your landlord is trying to kick you out without an order from a judge. Law enforcement will, I'm very confident law enforcement will do the right thing. If they don't, I suggest that the tenant ask the officer to contact their supervisor. I mean, in kind of a soft way, I inform the tenant that, look, if your landlord violates your rights and kicks you out, that's a lawsuit. If they use the state to do it, now it's violating your rights under color of law. That's what we call a federal civil rights lawsuit. So, hey, you know, deputy, you might want to talk to your supervisor, to talk to county council or the city attorney to see if this is really the move you want to make right here. That's very rare where I have to go there, but that's the kind of advice I give, because it is a violation of the law and federal civil rights if law enforcement participates. But I want to say again, I do not see that in this county or in our service area. I think the questions have stopped rolling. I feel like I've already taken up so much of your time. Thank you for your good questions.
Thank you so much, Greg. I just really appreciate you coming to talk to us. If people feel a desperate need to get hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
So for community partners, now that I'm acting managing attorney, my lines are open to you, so you can call and talk to me and I can talk to you. And if it's a client, then you want to send them to our office via phone. And we also have an email address for hard of hearing clients. So what I'll send out with the slides to Rob is our kind of COVID flyer about how to get in touch with us, which has that hard of hearing email address. So everyone has that. I think we'll have a new flyer because some of the things on there don't apply anymore. And that one was created in March or April. But for now, everything there still flies, so I'll send that out.
Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So next is Bobby, who's going to talk about the county's new eviction prevention program. Bobby, you're out there somewhere, huh?
Yes. Hello. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So the county was allotted $500,000 to help with eviction prevention for payment of past due rent or mortgage for households in Humboldt County who have suffered financial hardship as a result to COVID. So what we're doing is we're making payments to the landlord or the mortgage company for whatever the applicant owes since March of 2020. So they can apply online. There is a tenant application and also a landlord application on the county website. Does everybody have that information? That went out pretty widely. And so when the applications come in, any families with children are going to go over to CalWorks staff to review for any kind of diversion or potential CalWorks eligibility, and they have that discussion about how they're able to pay their future rent so that they aren't behind if they don't have any income or if they're under the income limits for CalWorks. They do have that discussion with the applicant, because not only are we worried about the past rent getting taken care of, but we want to make sure that people can stay in their homes and this not just be a Band-Aid to take care of just the past rent. So those applications are going over to CalWorks staff for evaluation to see how else we can help the applicants. Individuals who do not have children in the home, they're going to a different unit to process to see what other resources are available for future rent. So far, we've had over 100 applications. So that's been very promising. And we are asking for some verifications. The past due rent or mortgage has to be the property that's the applicant's primary place of residence. The payments are going directly to the landlord or the mortgage company. It's available to households up to 120% of the area median income. So that's a pretty high income limit. They must have experienced job loss or reduction in hours due to COVID. We are offering up to $5,000 for past due rent or mortgage. There are some exceptions that are made depending on the situation. We're encouraging everybody to apply regardless of how much is owed. And we are asking the landlords to waive any late fees accrued. And is everybody familiar with the city's COVID-19 assistance fund, the city of Eureka? If people are within the Eureka city limits and they meet that income requirement, which was 80% of the area median income, we are doing a referral over to the city of Eureka, but we are keeping the application open if for whatever reason they're unable to be funded by the city of Eureka. Eric Kanega, the program manager, is in coordination with the city of Eureka about applications. And then again, I already talked about this, but households that appear eligible to CalWorks, we're going to be working with them about future rent as well. So we are asking for some verifications, verification of identity, verifications of any monthly income, just to make sure that they are under that limit. Verification that the income loss or reduction was due to COVID, because this is CARES funding, so it does need to be related to COVID. For the rental assistance, we're asking for a copy of the current lease, how much is owed, and a completed W-9. And for mortgage, we just need to know how much. We need verification of which months are unpaid, so that we're making sure that we're paying for the appropriate months, and how much is owed. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm curious about how many applications you've had so far.
We've had over 100. As of 5 p.m. last night, I believe we had 103 applications. And it's been pretty split, 50-50 of how many households have children under 18 and how many do not. So it's a wide variety of people applying.
If a family, or say someone who's assisting a family kind of doesn't know where to start, can they just simply call like the call center and then they'll help get them in touch with the right process or online?
Yes, if somebody's unable to access the application online, they can just call over to the call center, and the call center will fill out that application with them. We wanted to make sure that all the applications are filtered through one central location,
Right.
since it is a first come, first serve. And then whoever's processing that application will get in touch immediately. So it is really important that we have really good contact information for people. We have been calling people back who have applied, and I don't know if it's because the county maybe has a blocked number or something, but they don't always answer the phone. And we want to get these processed and checks written as soon as possible. So if you're helping somebody apply, encourage them to use great contact information. They can submit their verifications by mail, or we can start a secure email, an encrypted email, and then they can provide the verifications back encrypted. So we're trying to make sure that there's all different ways for people to provide their verifications so that they're processed quickly, because we want to make sure that people aren't going to be evicted.
Is there any provision for in-person application?
They can apply in the office if they want to. If they come into the office to apply, a worker will call them over the phone in the lobby area and complete the online applications with them, just as though they were calling the call center.
And if a services program wanted to host an application fair, is that something that could be done?
Yeah, it as long as the applications are being done online, or if they have a phone to call the call center, either way, we're accepting applications up until December 30th or until funding runs out.
Does anybody else have questions? Thank you very much, Bobby.
Thank you.
Okay, so next is new funding coming up, and we have several people. Robert will help us figure out what some of these are, and Andrew Whitney from Planning is also on the call today, who will probably be talking about permanent local housing allocation and the community development block grants. So Robert, if you'd like to get started.
Sure. So let me, okay, so you can all see my screen? Yes? Okay. So first up, I'm going to talk about the Emergency Solutions Grants Coronavirus Program. Can you all still see it? Yep. Okay. So ESG-CV highlights. First of all, it's funded by the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Stimulus Act, or CARES Act. This is the primary vehicle for federal funding for homelessness. It's directly related to COVID. Total of $4 billion nationwide. A lot of entitlement jurisdictions got direct allocations of these funds. We're not an entitlement, or we don't have any entitlement jurisdictions in Humboldt County because the populations aren't high enough. You need to be a city of 50,000 or a county of 200,000. So the 43 million allocation to the state is intended to be for those non-entitlement jurisdictions, although the state ended up distributing some of it to entitlement jurisdictions for some reason. 983,800 of that amount was allocated to Humboldt County, which is actually really high relative to our overall population, so that was great. The Continuum of Care, the HHHC, had to designate an administrative entity to administer the funds, and so they designated the county. And round two allocation is much, much larger, 271 million, and HCD has not yet announced how those funds will be distributed. There is an FAQ up on their website that suggests that it might well be similar, because they want us to submit a resolution that allows us to apply for maybe 3-4 times what the amount is in the round one allocation. So these are federal funds. They are governed by the ESG regulations, the federal ESG regulations. So there are specific categories of projects. There are no hybrid projects allowed. You have to fit your project into one of these boxes. So we have emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, street outreach, HMIS, and homelessness prevention. And all funds must be expended by August 31st, 2022. It's looking like we're probably only going to accept applications for emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and street outreach. We got a lot of encouragement from HUD and HCD and others that these particular funds would be best spent on people who are already on the streets or in emergency shelters. As far as propping up new emergency shelters, new construction and acquisition is not allowed under the federal regulations, but these funds can be used for conversion, major rehabilitation, or other renovation of emergency shelters. And temporary shelters that have been determined necessary to prepare for, and respond to coronavirus shall not be subject to the minimum periods of use. So normally, if you're renovating a shelter with these funds, you have to use it as a shelter for, I think, 20 years. So that does not apply to this particular pot of money. The following requirements that normally apply to ESG have been waived. So normally if you're in an ESG rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention project, you have to meet with your case manager once a month. That's been waived. Normally, the rents cannot exceed the fair market rent for the area, which effectively, cuts ESG program participants out of a lot of the rental housing that's available in the community at any given moment. So that's been waived. And federal habitability and environmental review standards and requirements shall not apply to ESG-CV funding for temporary shelters. There's a link there to a document that has a lot of guidance from HUD on waivers for various programs, including ESG. So I didn't want to go into great detail on all of the ESG requirements because we are offering a training on August 19th. That's going to be provided by Homebase, which is a nonprofit law firm out of San Francisco. And they're also a HUD technical assistance provider, HCD technical assistance providers. So this training is funded by the state, actually under their technical assistance initiative. We do want you to register for the training in advance by clicking this link. And we wanted people to complete the survey by August 7th, but better late than never, so you can still complete the survey here. And I think I'll pause for questions about ESG. And I can't see the chat, so if anybody can read them to me if there are any.
Doesn't look like there's any updated questions in the chat room.
All right, and so the county is going to be issuing a request for proposals for ESG, so that'll be sometime after our training. So be on the lookout for that. It will get announced on the HHHC email listserv. Next up, Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, Round 2. We are in the process right now of finalizing our contracts for that were awarded under HHAP Round 1. The legislature allocated $300 million for a second round of this program under AB 83. You can click on this link here if you want to see the legislation. That's all that's been published about this program so far. The state has not updated their HHAP webpage. So if you want to go to the source, you actually have to read the legislation. 130 million of that will go to cities with populations of at least 300,000 people. So we're getting completely cut out of this. The cities are also part of counties and continuums of care. So the big cities are double dipping essentially with this HHAP money, just like they did in round 1. And then 90 million of that goes to the continuums of care based on the 2019 point in time count, 80 million to the counties, again, based on the point in time count. We had 1.1251% of the state's total homeless population in the 2019 point in time count. So we're anticipating allocations of about 1,000,000 and 900,000 respectively for the COC and county pools for a total of 1.9 million approximately. So eligible uses include rapid rehousing, operating subsidies in supportive housing, emergency shelters, and navigation centers, including operating reserves, street outreach, services coordination, system support, delivery of permanent housing, and innovative housing solutions such as hotel and motel conversions, prevention and shelter diversion, and new navigation centers and emergency shelters based on demonstrated need. So demonstrated need, they want you to submit data on your summer and winter vacancy rates at your emergency shelters in order to justify the need. And the timeline, the state must release the application no later than November 30th. Applications to the state will be due 60 days after release of application. State must respond to application within 60 days of receipt, and all funds must be expended by June 30th, 2026. So I the legislation doesn't explain this, but I assume the HHHC is going to have to designate an administrative entity for the COC portion, which it might be the county, it might be it has to be a local government. So it could be one of the cities, potentially. What we did in HHAP round 1 is we combined the county portion and the COC portion when we put out our RFP. And that's it for my slideshow. Any questions?
Yeah, Frank Richards here. I had a question. Can you hear me?
I can.
Can you guys hear me? I'm Frank Richards. I'm chairman of the Building Lives by Building structure nonprofit here in Hoopa. And so you're talking about a couple different kinds of funding, but none of them go for new construction. And my other question would be the policies or the zoning ordinances of the JADUs and ADU. So I'm thinking, like, if there's a shelter that's there that has land that's available to put 2 small homes or small structures on, that would be for housing the youth or the homeless, because that's where our program's going. Team member with HumboldtHomes.org, we're presenting to the Hoopa Tribal Council next week to start manufacturing small homes. We're going to start with a brand new storage container units, but we're looking to start branch out into tiny homes and small homes that are kits. But my question was, does any of that fall within the parameters of what you were talking about today? Thank you.
Sure. So HHAP can be used for construction and acquisition. ESG cannot. So it's possible that you could construct permanent supportive housing or an emergency shelter using the HHAP funding.
And is it an OFA, or is it when will that come out to be able for people to apply for it or to help
So
out?
the statute requires the state to release the application by November 30th. I'm not expecting them to get that done early, because I know that office in particular is very understaffed and they have a lot going on already. The people that want to use the funding to do something like what you described are not going to apply directly to the state. Rather, the county and whomever the HHHC designates as the administrative entity will apply after the state releases that application. Then, assuming those applications are successful, and I don't know why they wouldn't be, because this is a block grant, so you just have to meet the minimum requirements. Then we would release a request for proposals that people that want to build a new shelter or housing or something, or rental assistance, whatever it is, could apply for.
There was a meeting yesterday with the HHHC board, and on there I asked people if they had seen the new Land Surplus Act. I think it's AB 1486, because that seems to be the problem. No land available to build on. So we'll be looking into that. Thank you.
Yeah, on the Land Surplus Act, I'll just say that there is a map of all the surplus properties that have already been declared by jurisdictions available on the HCD website. And I took a look at it yesterday and found the only surplus property that's been declared thus far in Humboldt County is the Lucas Street property, which was offered for sale earlier this year and did not sell.
One more question I had is this group here, is anybody working with the homeless Native youth or urban natives? Is there an organization that is handling that population? I am enrolled HHAP travel member, and the group Building Lives by Building Structure is all HHAP travel members. And we're looking, I don't know if where to find that, if anybody has any information on that. Thank you.
Frank, I don't know of a program that specifically this is Nezzy, that specifically addresses just Native youth. There are programs that target youth, but being involved with street outreach, we see folks often, but there's not a program affiliation for the kind of thing that you're talking about. Are you looking for referrals? Excuse me.
Yeah, we're looking to, I'm looking for outreach. I know that's a serious issue with what we're talking about here today. A lot of urban natives kind of fall off the map, and I know at least 3 or 4 that they don't want to come back to the reservation, but they're stuck out there, lost. So I'm just trying to contact people who have that kind of information. Thank you.
Could you quickly say what your eligibility is, or how youth is defined, what the age range is?
We're looking at the older youth, 18 to 25, is it 24? But the youth that are the homeless youth, 16 to 24.
Okay.
This is Kelsey from Humboldt County Transition Age Youth Collaboration. We work with all youth, not specifically Indigenous youth, but all youth 16 to 26. And we just received a bunch of supplies through HEAP funding for houseless youth. So if they need anything to, we can help to also direct them to any housing options that we know about, but we have gear if they are currently and wanting to continue living on the streets. So there's like food supplies and camping supplies. So if you would like to connect with us, we can, or send youth our way, we can connect them with those resources. Pass.
Yeah, and this
Awesome.
is
I'll give you my email.
all right. Yeah, and this is Rosemary. I'm also youth organizer, HCTC, and every youth 16 to 25 will be assigned a case manager or a peer coach to help them through the process.
Yep, that's all I had. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, hi. This is Roger again from Humboldt County Office of Ed. I don't see, unless it's one of the phone numbers that I don't recognize. Of course, there's the Redwood Community Action Agency Youth Service Bureau, and they run both sheltering services, short-term, extended care, and then also a 24-hour hotline, crisis line. So they too serve all youth, but they may have, they're another organization, Frank, you may want to contact Pat Sweeney, 707-443-8322. And I'm sure they serve Indigenous youth as they request services.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Anybody have any more questions? Okay, so I believe Andrew Whitney is going to cover the PLHA. Is that right, Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Sally. So the permanent local housing allocation is a formula allocation to the jurisdictions based on receipts of a real estate transaction tax or fee. And it's allocated on an annual basis, but you apply for it on a 5-year, with a 5-year plan. Back in, I believe it was July, county applied for our permanent local housing allocation to HCD with a 5-year plan. The 5-year plan included 3 activities that were eligible under the funding guidelines. One was assisting persons who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And the board approved a plan that included $144,668 to assist people experiencing homelessness or at risk of. The board authorized or recommended that the Humboldt Housing Trust Fund Homeless Solutions Committee be involved in allocating that funding. So that's a work in progress. The application has been received by HCD. The funding, it's unclear when it will be available to be implemented. My guess is 3 to 6 months from now. So that's that. And I don't know if we want to discuss other things beyond homelessness here, but I could discuss what other activities are in that application if you'd like.
I think we'd like to know.
So the Housing Trust Fund, the permanent local housing allocation includes a statutory requirement to assist homeownership among workforce. It's called workforce homeownership opportunities. So we've included about 20% of that funding for mortgage assistance for income eligible first-time home buyers. This is a program that we run out of the Planning and Building Department with various funding sources. So we'll be using 20% of the funding for that. And then 70% of the funding allocated over the 5-year plan will be used for the development of multifamily residential housing for low-income people, essentially those earning 60% or less of the area median income. So that's a lower income housing development. This is typically the segment of our housing production that lags all other production in our county based on our housing element and in our regional housing needs. So funding will be used for that. We're gonna probably target that in years 3 or 4 or 5, because we need to bank up enough funding essentially to have an impact and have a development pencil out, because we're going to need other funding from other sources as well if we're going to make that happen. The goal would be to produce a 24-unit multifamily project with that funding. And I think that's it for the permanent local housing allocation. If anyone has questions on that, we'll take those now, and then we can move on to the CDBG COVID funding.
Andrew, this is Janelle. Can you hear me? I have a question.
Yes, I can.
On the multifamily housing, are you doing a 24-unit development, or are you considering doing a mixed income with low income included?
The funding will assist a low-income development. So the units may be a part of a larger development. There's no restriction on that, but any funding that's applied from this source will go towards the 60% area median income or below group. So, you know, this may ride along with some other larger development, but the money will assist that target income group.
Good. I just see this as a way of, years ago, there was a push to have inclusionary zoning, I think it was called, well, anyway, that encourage, you know, force developers to have low-income housing in their development. And I see this as a way to just encourage them to do that. And I just think that that's a better way of doing low-income housing. Just a personal opinion. Thank you.
We'll keep that in mind. Thanks. Okay, well, if no questions on that, we'll move on to the CDBG COVID funding, which is the next item on the agenda. So when the COVID pandemic hit, Congress did the CARES Act, which allocated resources, a lot of resources in many different avenues to help communities adapt to the pandemic. We heard about the tenant, sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the program here, but essentially assisting tenants with rent to prevent eviction. So that type of activity. HCD did a formula allocation, meaning they just threw out a number for every jurisdiction and said, this is what you get. Come back to us with projects and we'll fund them if they're eligible. So we did, part of the CDBG process is a public meeting. We had a Zoom meeting earlier in the spring. I'm forgetting the date off the top of my head, but discussed the funding source. And for the county, Humboldt County, HCD allocated $289,000. Every jurisdiction within the county was also allocated funding, although those jurisdictions that do not have housing elements seem to not be eligible to apply. So for the county share, the $289,000, we're looking at, we did the meeting, we got feedback. We're looking at, essentially we had 5 proposals that came in, and we've kind of narrowed that down to 3. We're only allowed to do 3 activities to this allocation. So we're going to put forward a COVID-19 health service improvement project down in Redway. We're trying to increase the care modality down at the Redwoods Rural Health Center in Redway to allow them to treat patients in a socially distanced manner. In other words, they've got a small facility and they need to do their intake outdoors. So we're going to help them get set up to do intake of patients down there. That's one activity that's been recommended to the Board of Supervisors. The other one is the Boyd Road Night Shelter COVID-19 Safety Improvements Project. The Arcata House Partnership operates the night shelter on Boyd Road. Their capacity has been diminished because they're trying to operate under social distancing procedures. The proposal would make improvements to their yard and erect a 4-season type tent shelter that will act as a living and dining space for guests. And that will free up space in the building for more room for sleeping, essentially. And then we're also putting forward a proposal to provide food aid and hotel stays in Southern Humboldt. The Southern Humboldt Housing Opportunities Organization has been implementing food aid and hotel stays down in Redway, Garberville area. And so this funding will allow them to continue doing that. I'll add, I have a little concern about this one because we're not allowed to duplicate services with the CDBG-CV funding. And with all the different assistance programs that are currently underway, it may be difficult for us to prove that there's no duplication of services in this case, but we're going to try and see what happens. We did get 2 other proposals, and I'll just touch on those briefly because they were good proposals. But given the funding limitations and other factors, we decided not to go with those. The RCAA put forward a emergency rental assistance program. Definitely a worthwhile program, but given that we've allocated $500,000 to a very similar program, albeit one that's going to sunset at the end of this year, we decided to hold off on that and see how that goes, and if other funding becomes available to continue that. If not, we'll be looking to the CDBG round 2, well, the COVID response round 2, to potentially fund a similar program as that need develops. And then Frank is here today. Frank, we got the building lives by building structure proposal. Their proposal involves the construction and placing of modular residency units for the purpose of quarantine and shelter. A good concept. Unfortunately, the proposal lacked site control documentation. Any construction activity funded by CDBG needs to be shovel ready, and we have to know where the units will be placed with agreements in place to pull that off. So again, we'll be looking forward to continuing that discussion, but we're going to go with the food aid and hotel stays in Humboldt, Southern Humboldt, Boyd Road shelter improvements, and then the health service improvements in Redway. So any questions on that? I'll take those now.
Yeah, this is Frank. So when you say shovel ready, what does that mean? I mean,
that means you've got you got to have site control. You have to have a place to, you know, I understand you've got the wherewithal and the mechanism to build the units, but we need to know where the units are going, and you know, that they're allowed to be placed there in terms of, you know, an agreement with the property owner, and then environmental clearance on placing those units, or, you know, permitting placement of those units wherever they're going. So
right, yeah, so that's where our hope was, to collaborate and join forces with folks like yourselves that might have land, or that has a house already that could have an ADU. I don't know, you know, off reservation property. So that's why I'm involved with some of these talks that we're talking about today, to collaborate with. We have the product. We're going to have the product. And so we are looking for partners who do have land. Thank you.
yeah, that's good, Frank. We do need to find those places for housing, and that is the what I've seen to be the challenge is the availability of the locations that are served with infrastructure. You know, that is the hard part. So keep working and we'll stay in touch.
Andrew, this is Debbie Glassberg, and I'm working with Frank, and we had talked about, you know, the parking lots of hospitals to place these units. Would that be a consideration?
You know, it's a possibility. We definitely would need an agreement in place with the hospital.
Okay, thank you very
much. Before we would consider going after funding to support that application. So, but yeah, if you can get that agreement and you've got that location and they're ready to plug in the units, that would be a much more eligible proposal than what we saw come in.
Okay, thank you so much.
So I see Betty Chin's on here, and then I viewed her project over there on Coster Street. Those are containers in a parking lot, I believe. What kind of land was that?
That was city-owned property, Frank.
Okay.
It started out as a donation from a private party to place it initially, and then the city zoned to place it in their parking lot there.
Okay, because that seems to be the problem. The issue from what I see nationwide is that people don't want the homeless housing next to them. And so that's unfortunate, very unfortunate system to have here. But yeah, if we all work together, I think we can get something going great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Andrew or Robert?
I have a question. Is there a list of available unused state and county property? Where, and if so, where could I access that?
Andrew, do you know?
As far as the county has the Lucas Street property has been declared surplus and offered for sale. Beyond that, the county has owns some parcels, and years ago I looked at this as a part of the multifamily residential housing inventory and looking at potential county-owned properties that could be used for multifamily housing. And there are some parcels out there, but they're all very marginal and or being utilized by the county for various purposes, typically like side of the road, fill, I don't know what you call it, storage, and then just pieces of land that are, you know, 45-degree slope and slumping and landslide parcels, and just pieces of land that have a shape and size that make them impossible to utilize for anything.
Also,
So,
sorry.
in terms of state-owned, I don't have a list of those parcels.
Kathy, this is Nezzy. There are some state-owned parcels. There's probably not a great deal of them. I think 3 or 4. In terms of county properties, we've been through this a lot. There are county properties other than those which Andrew mentioned, but they are falling into particular design or zones, like the airport zone, that won't be utilized, though they're not being employed to do anything at this point. So there's not a lot of option there.
Yeah. But Andrew, you said there were some some small parcels here and there that might be available? Are they in like
No, not
neighborhoods
really. I
or?
mean, they're at like the intersections of roads. They're like I said, they're not usable necessarily except for storage of materials. They're small. They're located under power lines. They're slumping down the side of a mountain. Things like that. They're in a flood zone. They're, because we, as government entities, we're not allowed to put housing wherever we want. We need to make sure that it's permitted and safe. And so we can't put it in the flood zone, and we can't put it on a fault, and we can't put it in a tsunami run-up area. And we need to make sure that it's got safe ingress and egress. And we need to make sure that it's served by police, fire, and various other, public safety things. So given all those requirements, I'm not aware of any parcels that would be suitable for housing that are owned by the county, except for Lucas Street.
So what if a person has a home, has land, and wants to put a couple of ADUs back there for youth, homeless youth shelter? Is that able? Are they able to do that?
Yeah. So Frank, that's a great concept, and it would be allowed to some extent. A couple, no, but a single, yes. So the county's working on updating our accessory dwelling unit land use requirements or permitting regulations, and under state law, it's currently allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit on your parcel if it meets certain requirements such as setbacks and services. In other words, you have to have an approved septic system and or be served by a community service district to provide the services needed to support that unit. So yeah, that's fully in play. And I think that's a great idea to market your units and your program directly to property owners, because that takes a lot of the governmental requirements and involvement out of the picture, and ultimately could allow the implementation on a quicker timeline.
So Andrew, Sally, Robert, is there money available to help landlords build that kind of capacity on their own property?
Not currently that I'm aware of. I mean, they can go to a bank, obviously, but the county has no program developed and running to provide financing to do that. It's possible we could work in that direction. If we were to do that, at least in our department, it would be a loan based on a secured deed of trust on a property. It'd be a preferential rate and term loan. It would probably be a 30-year deferred payment loan that could provide the money to do that, but we don't have that program going now.
Is there anything through Humboldt Area Foundation or any of the local funders to do that?
I'm not aware of anything. I'm not aware of anything on that scale or type of activity. Essentially, when you say money available, what do you mean?
Well, funds that might be available to help buy a container or help turn a garage into a unit, something like that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think if it is available, it would be a loan.
So
there's a lot of
based
what
on
we're
what,
talking about, a lot of what we're talking about, does that all pertain to reservation land? Because what a developer bought a foreclosed piece of land here on the reservation, wants to develop it into a neighborhood, like 4 or 5 units. Will that developer have to adhere to Humboldt County ordinances?
I'm getting out of my area of expertise here, Frank. I'm not sure, but I think that's a tribal property, so it's tribal jurisdiction in terms of permitting. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not certain. That does the I don't know. I'm sorry. I could ask around and try to get an answer to that, but I don't know.
Yeah, according to the land thing, if I had a tribal piece of land, I could apply for these funds to create a homeless housing units. We are presenting to the
Sorry,
tribal
Frank.
council. We are presenting to the council next week, and then they could designate a neighborhood for elders, and so would this money be available for us to develop a piece of land for homeless youth, for elders? Would that be who would be eligible?
In the tribal in the reservation?
Yes.
That would not be in the county's purview or funding jurisdiction. You'd want to follow up with a tribal CDBG program for that. But yes, that sounds like a good one for the tribal CDBG program, but not for the county, because the county, we handle, we don't go into the cities usually, and we usually don't go into the reservations either, because those jurisdictions apply to CDBG funding on their own purview. We're the county.
Yeah, they're building, our housing authority is building some really nice homes in my neighborhood and on reservation, but they're higher income. And so the low income, the no income people apply for the HIP funding program, but that's only 2 people could apply for that. So it's like it's a catch-22, for the people who have no money. We have a large amount of large families living together under one roof. And income-wise, they can't afford these nice homes that our housing authority is putting out. And there's hardly any money for them. And so that's where a lot of our homeless people are. They're not homeless, they're houseless. And they get pushed out because they have too many people living in the home. And that's what I want to create. I want to create a in-between, the bridge in between that type of population. Thank you.
Andrew, I think you touched on this real briefly, but could you just say a little bit more about the per parcel limits on ADUs and JADUs?
Yeah, sure. It's my understanding that, and I'm not, I haven't read the ordinance, but essentially we're coming into compliance with what the state allows, and the state allows 1 accessory dwelling unit, which is separate from the main residence. And that accessory dwelling unit needs to be smaller, and I believe there may be a square foot limit on that, and the size of that unit. I think it's 1,200 square foot or less. But if you have a large house, for instance, and you want to create what's called a junior accessory dwelling unit, you can essentially put an apartment within the existing footprint of your house. So you can, knock down some walls, reconfigure some stuff, put an entrance on the other side of your house, and rent that out as a junior accessory dwelling unit. So it's feasible, and doable under, or allowable under state law and soon under county zoning, to have 3 dwelling units on a single family parcel now. So, you know, there is the potential for a serious uptick in the number of housing units, but it's not a free for all. You have to make sure that you've got the services. In other words, you can't put 3 units when you have a on-site septic system that's only set up for 1 unit. And you can't do that, for instance, if your lot is so small that you can't provide the setbacks to the edge of the parcel. So, you know, there's definitely things that you need to comply with, but the new ADU and JDU regulations do allow for a significant amount of production of housing in single family residential neighborhoods.
But then if you wanted to do more than one ADU, because the JADU has to be part of the main house, right? It can't be a freestanding structure. So if you wanted to do more than one of these, go ahead.
Yeah, you can't do more than one tiny home on your, so you can have you have to have a main house because you're in a single family residential situation. And you're allowed, hold on, I'm gonna close the door. I got a fair amount of noise going on. Sorry about that. So the ADU is a separate, distinct structure from the main residence. The JDU must fit within the existing building footprint of the main residence. You're only allowed to have an ADU and a JDU and a main residence. You can't have a main residence and then 2 satellite ADUs on your parcel if under the single family zoning. So I don't know if I'm being clear with that or I need to clarify it, but feel free to ask away.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So it's just, if you're looking at, you know, several of these things, then it needs to be zoned multifamily.
Yes, that is true. You can't just start putting them down like mushrooms. They have to, you can only get 1 per lot. But you are allowed to do a JDU, which is an apartment within the main house, essentially.
Andrew,
It's not separate.
Andrew, this is Debbie Glassberg. In the case of putting them in a parking lot for COVID isolation units, would the ADU laws be different for that? You know, if a hospital said, hey, we'd like to put 10 of these units, would that be an exception?
That would definitely be a different situation because accessory dwelling units exist in residential zoned property. In other words, a parking lot is usually a commercial zone. And so that's a gray area in terms of the permitting, but it's not likely that that would be allowed as a long-term housing solution. It might be an interim situation, but it's not going to be something you can just put up in a parking lot and run it like a tiny home. Well, I wish that Michael Richardson was here because he's definitely delving into the this issue a lot more than I have been. I've been looking more at the funding side, not so much the planning side. But it's a very different situation from ADUs. An ADU will not be permitted as a dwelling unit in a parking lot. It's going to be something else.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
So Andrew, did you say that all ADUs can be no bigger than 1,200 square feet?
That is my understanding. It definitely the ADU has to be smaller than the main residence. So there has to be a main residence, and the ADU must be smaller than the main residence. We're battle testing this concept right now because we got someone that wants to put in a 2,500 square foot ADU on top of a 3,000 square foot house on a parcel, and our planning department is having some heartburn over that idea, and I think ultimately there's going to be a square foot limitation in terms of what you can do. I think it's 1,200 square feet.
Yeah, Andrew, this is Frank. I'm just a little bit confused on the site. On that application, I don't remember it asking for a specific site on that application for the St. Joe's LOI. But it seems to me that things are changing almost every day with this ADU, JADU thing. And it's very interesting, how some people are not for it or don't understand it or don't want it. But yeah, this has been a pretty good journey for me, but there are people who need to get help. I just seen that article down south of California about Google, Apple, and Facebook putting in billions of dollars to help the affordable housing situation that they created. So there's going to be a lot of people coming our way, and I don't think we're going to be ready for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Do we have any other questions for Andrew or Robert? We do have Raul Torres from Department of Health and Human Services, and he has some information for us on Project Room Key. So maybe we'll move on to Raul next. Thanks. Raul?
Hello. How are we doing? For Room Key, I can talk about our shelter, since that is where most of my experience with Room Key is. Our shelter here in Eureka, it's been quite a work in progress trying to help people stay sheltered in. It's very difficult because a lot of people don't like to be sheltered in, especially when some of the overall county sheltering rules have relaxed. And I imagine it's like some of the issues the mission has with people wanting to go out, come back in, go out, come back in, and do things like that. It's not easy because you're working with people with mental health issues or substance abuse issues, people who are not used to staying in one place or another. One of the more interesting things I think we've found with working with this population is you reach, I don't know if we call them breaking points or what, where we find that people struggle after a certain amount of time being in the shelter, where just following a routine becomes difficult. And it's quite a learning experience. Trying to help people and help people find housing, help people get the documentation needed, and trying to understand what we're doing and what sheltering in means. And I think one of the most difficult parts of this job is just trying to get people to understand that we're trying to keep them safe, because I think many people don't understand that. Many people just heard the media message, free motel rooms, So a lot of people thought that's what it was, and it's really hard to try and get people to understand. No, we're trying to keep you safe. We actually don't want you near people without masks because we don't want you to get sick and die. So it's a very interesting program that we're trying to do here, and it's got lots of challenges and lots of things I think we weren't prepared for. Not just working with people in this type of environment, but just running the shelter itself with all the things that are involved in that. It's been quite, like I said, a learning experience. And of course, we're thankful for Roomkey because it allows us to try and keep people safe and also try and have the ability to have people in a place where we can try and work with them to get them housed and to get information we need to move that forward. But it's also difficult because then you become a target for every medical provider in the county. It seems to know my phone number because there's one person or another who they believe should be in the shelter. We look like a nice exit plan for hospitals, which is also difficult because people are, some people are in pretty bad shape, and we're not necessarily a great step down unit for some places. So I would say that it's a great thing. Thankful that the state's doing this and that we have this opportunity, but it's obviously another difficult challenge, especially working with our population and trying to do the right things and keep them safe and trying to move them forward to get housed, which is part of what we do. Thank you. I hope that's what you were looking for, Sally. I wasn't sure.
I think so. Does anybody have any questions for Raul? He's a busy man. This is a good chance to grab him.
I have a question, Raul. What is the funding outlook for the Roomkey program?
Fortunately for me, I don't have much to do with that. My understanding from what we've been told is that we should assume that we will be running through December for a fact, but I haven't been told anything beyond that. So originally, obviously, we thought we were running through June and then maybe July, and then the most current information that I've been told is just assume you're going to go through December at least, and then if things changes between now and then we'll be told. Another thing that's important for anyone to know, as I'm sure some of you are aware, very difficult to find people who really want to get close to other people and do a job, do some of this work. It's one of the other byproducts that we've had to learn about other people is who's high risk. A lot of people concerned about getting sick or getting their family members sick. But that adds another layer of complexity to doing something like this. People aren't running out of the hills to help wanting to work with something like this because it scares people, and I get it. But it's just another layer of complexity on top of trying to work with people. Not a ton of people wanting to get into it because of, honest fears, and I get it.
As far as funding,
that certainly is. Okay.
So FEMA is reimbursing 75% of these costs, but they are keeping us on the knife's edge by announcing whether or not they will continue providing reimbursement for the following month. They've been announcing that on the last day of the month, or sometimes even a couple days into the month. So we already have people in the motels and don't know whether FEMA is going to continue to reimburse. The county did allocate a portion of the coronavirus relief funds to keep the motel project operational through December. But that's dependent on the FEMA reimbursement continuing also. I mean, if the FEMA reimbursement stops, then we're going to have to figure something out rapidly.
Yes, and that brings us to the winter.
Yeah, that's kind of what my question was. So Raul, the project you're running is strictly in Eureka, is that right?
That I am running is strictly in Eureka. There are other shelters that are also doing room key, but my responsibility is here in Eureka.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how the FEMA reimbursement fits in with what's going on down in Southern Humboldt with that crew. But it sounds like things are fairly certain to be funded through the end of this year, and then what happens next year is anyone's guess.
I would say that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, I think so. It's really hard to plan ahead in this environment. And I keep reminding myself that we have never done this before. So it's not a short-term crisis like maybe a hurricane would be. This is like a displacement of people with no end date in sight. And, you know, it's anybody's guess what's going to be happening once flu season hits on top of it. So it's a strange world we're living in right now. And I do want to say, I appreciate everybody out there that's just doing their very, very best to take care of themselves and their family and other people too. It's just incredibly brave of folks to step forward and to try to do something about our ongoing and persistent homeless problem in the face of another disease on top of it that is making real hardship for folks and for people that work with folks. So I appreciate every one of you, and all that you're doing is just amazing to me. Thank you.
This is Frank Richards. So the monies that we're talking about here is going to go towards hotel rehab or remodeling to have the room key. Is that what that we're talking about here? And if that is, who administrates that to the contractor or the construction people who are doing that? Thank you.
So room key is not about rehab. It's just about essentially master leasing the motels or paying for the rooms on a night-by-night basis to the motel owner and providing services. So it's an emergency shelter program.
Okay.
I was wondering if, Frank, if you're thinking about the follow-up to Room Key, Project Home Key.
Yes, yeah, that's what I think I was thinking about.
Okay. Robert, can you talk just a little bit about that?
Sure. So the state received $550 million in coronavirus funds that they decided they wanted to use to help local public entities and their nonprofit development sponsors to acquire properties. They don't necessarily have to be motels. Could be anything really that can be converted into permanent housing relatively rapidly, or that could be used as an emergency shelter or interim housing, they're calling it. That money has to be spent by December 30th because that was a deadline that was in the CARES Act. So the state had to spend a lot of money really, really quickly, which is challenging because you can acquire something, but then you also have to be able to operate it. And there's not a lot of good answers there are $50 million in the home key NOFA for operating expenses through June 30th, 2022. I also want you to be able to show how you're going to continue to operate it with your own money somehow in years 3, 4, 5, and they want specific details on that. So there was an application deadline yesterday. If you wanted to get into Tier 1, you really needed to apply by yesterday. Tier 2 applications are still being accepted through sometime in late September.
Thank you.
We're getting towards the end of our meeting now, and I really wanted to know if anybody out there has some announcements they'd like to make to the whole group.
So I did put, this is Roger from Humboldt County Office of Ed, and I did put in the chat, and I just want to highlight, as schools, we have, as districts are setting up and getting ready for reopening for the new school year, there is, because we have 32 school districts and another 15 charter schools here in Humboldt County. All of them get to decide when they are going to open and how they're going to deliver educational, how they're going to deliver education within the COVID pandemic. So that can be confusing for folks as they try to figure out, where they should register, how to register, and what day school is starting back up. And is it going to be distance learning, on-site, or some sort of hybrid? So if folks go to hcoe.org/COVID-19, there is a schedule of school reopenings that's updated daily. And so as school boards pass their plans to reopen, it's posted on this grid. And so, like I said, it's updated daily. It's updated as school boards make their final plans. So along with that schedule, that HCOE COVID-19 webpage has a chock full of resources for parents, for caregivers, for students, for agency people who are working with families. As different districts, distance learning has its pros and cons. Being on site has its pros and cons. Doing some sort of hybrid model. So this is all very stressful and can be challenging for a number of our families and students. So this webpage has a chock full of resources. And so I just wanted to highlight that. It's a really navigable, easy to navigate page, friendly. And then the other is, of course, our office, has been working throughout the summer and our team's available. So if people don't know where to turn to, they can always contact us and we'll help get them. And then we are finalizing the district liaison point of contact for the districts. And so next week, we hope to have an updated page, and then I'll send that out to Robert, and he can send that out to the general membership so that if folks need an advocate, they'll know who the person is, their phone number, and their email address if they need assistance from that individual school district. And then one last question, one last thing. We have been fielding questions in regards to immunizations. And so, especially as many districts go to distance learning or some sort of hybrid model. And we've been checking with CDE, and not just for foster and homeless youth, but for all children. There is no exception under COVID to deviate from the immunization schedules. There's no exceptions. Even if someone is doing full-on distance learning and they're not setting foot on campus, all immunization schedules and requirements are still fully in place. So anyway, that's it from me for now. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Roger. I want to second your comment about the website. It's wonderful. If you just want to look at a really great resource and probably find out things that you didn't know yet, I heartily recommend a visit. So thank you. Does anybody else have something they would like to say to the entire group? You have 46 people sitting here listening, so it's a good chance.
Hey, Sally, this is Cheryl with the Housing Authority. I know I've shared this with a smaller group, but with all 46 here, I just wanted to let people know that our Housing Choice Voucher application, that's for the Section 8 program, is available on our website. We are still there processing applications. We're getting ready to pull from our waitlist soon. So if your agency needs any applications, you're welcome to print them off the website. If you'd like us to send you some, we are happy to do that. And we haven't been doing outreach with agencies, but if you are with an agency who would like a walkthrough of our programs and our applications, please reach out to me and we'll see what we can do to get something set up via Zoom. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I think it's about time for us to go. If anybody got one more last minute.
I do.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Diamond with Open Door. I just wanted to update on two things. One, as we're moving to try and do video visits almost entirely with our population, with everyone we see, we are being really intentional about trying to make sure that folks who are houseless have access to do video visits, including purchasing phones, having tablets available on location so that the person can come into the location and actually like have a tablet visit with a provider, and solar powered chargers and a few other things, all of which are run through our case managers. They are income dependent, and is a 2-hour commitment by our case managers, who are also going to make sure that do their best to ensure that the person has long-term planning, not just like, cool, you're good for a month. Like, no, let's set you up so you're good for a year. And our Fortuna clinic, dental clinic, has reopened for patients in the Eel River Valley. They don't have to be a patient of record at Fortuna Open Door, but they do need to live in the Eel River Valley. That includes people who are primarily homeless in the Eel River Valley. That's what I got. Woo.
Anybody else?
Hi, this is Callie from formerly Veterans Resource Center. I put it in the chat box, and nothing terribly urgent, but I did want to let everyone know we now have a new name. We're Nation's Finest. So if anyone is looking for veteran services, you might not find us under Veterans Resource Centers anymore. Hopefully they've done enough to connect the new name to the old name, but we're still here, still providing services. And thank you all for all you're doing on this call. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And hopefully the next time we meet, it will be in person. It'll be nice to actually see people again. And thank you again for all that you do. And that's it for me. Have a wonderful weekend if you can. Bye.
You too.